All right, welcome everybody. Let's work on lesson number 6. This is going to be a big lesson, factoring. Okay, in lesson number 6, we're going to talk about the basic factoring techniques. Okay, so for the first part over here, it says write expressions for the two areas of the two rectangles in the figure below. So how do you determine area for a rectangle? It's just length times width, right? That's area for a rectangle. So here, what's your length? This is 2z. And what's the width over here? It's z. So what's the area for this shape? This is just 2z squared, okay? Pause the video and try and do this one, right? But very simply, it should just be 2z times 8. And that's just 16z, okay? So the area for this one is 16z, and the area for this one is 2z squared. What I want you to do is take your time and try and find the area for this rectangle over here. How would you find it, right? Notice that here, if I have area is equal to length, area is equal to length times width, here our length is z plus 8, right? And then what's our width? It's 2z. So here, all I would need to do is just distribute the 2z to each of this. So I have 2z squared plus 16z, okay? And notice that this, what we're doing is we're basically taking the area of this plus the area of this gives us this area over here, okay? But notice that if I have 2z squared plus 16z, right? Let's say if I have this 2z squared plus 16z, what is wait, let me fix the camera real quick. What is the greatest common factor? Okay. What is the greatest common factor? Notice that if I just look at this part over here, what's the greatest common factor of 2 and 16? That will be 2. Because if I say, all right, let's say if I have the number 2, right? And the number 16. What numbers, when you multiply, give you 2? It's only 1 and 2, right? But what numbers, when you multiply, give you 16? It's 1, 2, 4, 8, and 16. And if I were to ask you, what is the biggest number, or instead of number, I should say a factor, they share? Right? What is the biggest number that they share? Take a second and pause the video, but the biggest number they share is that 2. So 2 is the greatest common factor of 2 and 16. So then I put a 2 over here. Okay, so just to find the greatest common factor, right? That's what we want to do. So what about the next part? What about for the z squared and the z? What's the greatest common factor of z squared and z? This will be just z. And the idea for this is, if I have z squared and I have z, right? Z squared is equal to z times z, and z is just equal to z. How many z's do they share, right? How many z's do they share? They just share one z in common, so that's why z is the greatest common factor of z squared and z. Okay, and notice that I can take out the 2. You see how this 2z, I could take it out of this and I could take it out of this. And here, if I take 2z out of this, I'm just left with z. And if I take 2z out of this, I'm just left with 8. And notice that's how you factor this. When I take out the GCF of this 2z, this factors into this, okay? And then how do I know I'm right? Because look, what is 2z times z is 2z squared, and what's 2z times 8 is 16z. So you see, when I factor it out, I get that original thing back. And that's what we're going to do for this very quick section over here is, what is the greatest common factor for each of them? So what I want you to do is try and do number 1 and number 2. Find the GCF for each of them, okay? So here, let's look at the first part. What is the greatest common factor of 10 and 5? Well, the same idea we did over here, right? Don't you remember this part over here? I took my 2 and my 16 and I found all the factors, and What's the biggest number they shared? Was it 2? Okay, well, what's the biggest number, I'm sorry, the biggest factor the 10 and the 5 share? It's just 5. Okay? And what about, now we look at the next part. Here we have A, and what's the greatest common factor of A and A? It's just A. And now notice for the next part over here, we have this B, and you see how we have a B here, but we don't have a B here? We say B is not common. Basically, when we say B is not common, you're saying that B is not in all the terms. So I'll write that. You are saying that B is not in all the terms. Okay? And please remember, when I'm writing these notes over here, do not write these notes in the lesson, right? Or maybe even this, like this should not be in the lesson. This should be in your notes, okay, on the right side. Maybe I probably should have said that in the beginning, but from now on, like, if you wrote this in your lesson, you should transfer it over to your notes, okay? So here, what's the GCF of these two? It's 5A. And now notice, what do I do with that 5A? What I'm gonna do is, I take the GCF and I divide this by 5A, and I divide this by 5A. So what's 10 divided by 5 is 2. What's A divided by A? Nothing. What am I left with? B. 5 divided by 5 is 1. A divided by A, this is just 1. And that's it. Notice that this 10AB plus 5A is equal to this. And how do I know? Because when I distribute, what's 5 times 2 is 10. A times B is AB. 5A times 1 is 5A. Let's try and do this part over here. Factor out the greatest common factor for this one. And let's take a look over here. What's the greatest common factor of 3, 9, and 12? The greatest common factor is 3. What's the greatest common factor? So, my bad, let me just do this. 3, 9, and 12. Okay. What's the next one? What's the greatest common factor of g cubed, g squared? Oh, you see here, g is not common. Okay, so g is not common. What about h, and h? Yeah, just be h. So you see 3h is the greatest common factor of this whole thing. And what am I going to do with that 3h? I'm going to divide this by 3h. I'm going to divide this by 3h. And I'm going to divide this by 3h. And whatever I get, I'm going to put it over here. So here, let's just take our time. Here, what's 3 divided by 3? Cancels. H divided by h? Cancels. And when we say cancels, remember that 3 divided by 3 is 1. H divided by h is 1. Okay, so be very careful when we cancel. And now you're just left with g cubed. Okay, so now this is what? Negative 9 divided by 3 is negative 3. H divided by h cancels, g squared. 12 divided by 3 is 4. And h divided by h cancels. And we're just left with this. And then how do we know if this is okay? Because what happens when we multiply, right? What's 3h times this is 3g cubed h. What's 3h times this? Negative 9g squared h. And what's 3h times this 4 is 12h. And notice that, what do we get? Oh, I shouldn't mess it up. Notice that you get the original over here. What I want you to do is try and do this one by yourself, and then we'll go over it, all right? Okie dokie. So for this one, how does it work? What's the greatest common factor of 6, 9, and 18? It should be 3, okay? What's the greatest common factor of x squared, x? Oh, x is not common, okay? So x is not common. What about y cubed, y to the 4th, and y to the 5th? What's the greatest common factor of this, and this? It will be y cubed. And if you want to understand why, let's just take a look at this. So y cubed is equal to y times y times y. Y to the fourth over here is y times y times y times y. And y to the fifth is 5y's. And the same idea I had over here, don't you remember with the z's over here, how many z's do they share in common for z squared and z? They had one z in common, and that's why the z was the GCF. Here, how many y's do they have in common? They have 3 y's in common. So because they have 3 y's in common, y cubed is the GCF. If you want, a little trick is lowest exponent. Okay? Lowest exponent will always work. For example, like if I have z to the 8, z to the 10, and z to the 6, what's the GCF of this, this, and this? It'll be this guy because it has the lowest exponent, because there are 6 z's in all of them. Okay? So let's continue with this one. It's 3y cubed, and let's just speed this up. What am I going to do with that 3y cubed? I divide this by 3y cubed, I divide that by 3y cubed, and this by 3y cubed, and 6 divided by 3 is 2. Okay, y cubed cancels, and then I'm left with x squared. 9 divided by 3 is 3, x stays there, and what's y to the 4th divided by y to the 3? That's just y. Okay, and 18 divided by 3 is 6, and y to the 5 divided by y to the 3 over here is just y to the 2. Okay, and this is it. Alright, I hope that helped for the first part, because this idea of factoring out the greatest common factor is muy importante. Okay, I'll see you for the next video.